Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm sorry we're very slightly late here. We were just getting our PowerPoints lined up. Thank you all for coming. It's lovely to have you in the room. My name is David Mills, and this is the beginning of our Trinity Term webinar series. And we're speaking to you from Commons Vacation, where we are really honoured to have Fiona. Welcome to Fiona. She's going to talk today. Fiona is an LSE fellow, Fiona Gogescu, and she is going to talk about her research, which is a PhD research on degrees of value, cultivating privilege at university. Many of us thinking about the role that universities play in reinforcing social certification. This is an important subject. And sorry, a little bit of feedback there. And with no further ado, Fiona, you're most welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, hi everyone. I'm going to talk to you about my current research project, which is still work in progress. So, I look forward to your comments and feedback. It's titled Degrees of Value, Cultivating Privilege at an Elite University. And the case I picked is the London School of Economics, where I did my PhD, as well, where I also do my postdoctoral fellowship. But that's not the only reason why I picked this university. It also has some particular features. So LSE is located in central London, or as we like to say, at the heart of London, and has therefore strong connections to the city of London. It's also an international university, as the culture there on campus shows. So roughly 50% of undergraduate students are international students, and the percentage is higher overall. And then this is taken from the undergraduate handbook. It says top 3 reasons why you should study economics at LSE, and it notes there that the median salary of our undergraduate students 15 months after graduating is 50,000. So that's in terms of return of investment, it would indicate that this is a good choice. But also, when we think about the narrative that young people now are more instrumental when it comes to how they understand higher education, and the idea that they do want a good return on investment, if that perspective was to hold, it would probably be seen and observed at LSE. Okay, so thinking about the value of a university degree in a marketized environment, previous research has mentioned that the massification and marketization of higher education have changed its purpose and its wider relationship to society. And this is amplified by a changing economic context surrounding graduate employment, as young people are now facing an uncertain labor market. So they are paying high tuition fees, and at the same time, they are facing a higher risk of not getting graduate jobs. So then Tomlinson has written on how the role of social capital becomes important in leveraging the status value of different credentials. So it's about having the networks that would help your degree get recognized and converted into advantages in the labor market. So the around says that the cost for success is higher and the competition is fierce. So higher education is usually talked about as a ticket for social mobility, as ensuring social mobility, but are we instead seeing a story of social congestion? So recent university graduates are favorable social mobility prospects, and the research by Brooks and Everett in 2009 showed that there's widespread pessimism among young people that their university degree still provides a pathway into professional employment, though they interviewed graduates from a wide range of institutions. So they didn't focus on the elite universities. However, attending an elite institution has been found to favor, but not an elite outcome. So my two research questions are: how do students at LSE perceive the value of their university degree, and how is the perceived value of a degree linked to young people's understanding of success and to their prioritized goal during university? So Downs talks about different cultures of valuation, which are lenses through which the value of something comes to be recognized. And she differentiates between what she calls privileged intrinsicality, where this perspective assumes the primacy of ideas about the inherent value of higher education, and argues that higher education should be an end in itself, which is usually associated with a sense of nostalgia and superiority to these economic discourses that instrumentalize the value of higher education. And on the other hand, we have a perspective that she called biofinancialization, which is the financialization of everyday life, which makes financial value the most important, even above other values such as aesthetic, moral, and cultural values. The idea here is that the logic of financial gains penetrates our subjectivity, and it seems almost unacceptable for the individual or the citizen to be anything other than successful in economic terms. So this idea that we have to choose something that will lead to economic success. But she warns that these cultures do not only exist at the opposite ends of the spectrum, but they interact. So they might also be reactions to each other, and that individuals might draw on a combination of both when they think about how they value higher education. So she suggests that we should explore lay normativity, or how people themselves think about the value of higher education, which is what I do in this research. Okay, so Philip Brown talks about players and purists. The players are the students who are focused on outcomes, and they adopt the tactics that would give them the competitive edge, and they're willing to adjust themselves in ways that conform to the requirements of employers. Whereas purists are focused on the process and follow their intrinsic interests, and they have the meritocratic creed that educational and occupational selection processes are meant to reveal the ability and effort that meets the requirements of an employer. Do students either fall into one category or another, or do they have multiple competing goals? So empirical research conducted at Stanford and Harvard show that students there tend to draw symbolic boundaries. So on one hand, they say that their universities encourage different interests and passion and encourage students to build different skills and knowledge. And then they compare that to what they call the pre-professional universities, which are the ones who focus too much just on employment outcomes. But also they draw boundaries with these institutions that are seen as purely academic, that do not give you well-rounded set of skills. And research by Brooks et al. That was a bit critical of this notion that students really just think in terms of return on investment when they reflect on the value of their degree. They also find that students identify personal and intellectual growth as important and desirable, although they are also aware of the necessity of thinking about how their degree will help them get good employment. Okay, and then Tomlinson et al. Identify multiple forms of capital that students use to manage the transition from higher education to the labor market. So they talk about human capital, which is built around the knowledge that individuals acquire through educational experiences and qualification. Social capital, that refers to the relationships and networks that can enhance students' job opportunities. And these relationships can be formed before, during university. Then cultural capital, encompassing the culturally valued knowledge, behaviors, and dispositions that might align to the organization graduate seeks to enter. Identity capital, which is capturing the extent to which a graduate's biography and experiences can be presented as a compelling professional identity. And psychological capital, understood as the capacity to adapt to challenging circumstances and sustain career goals. So these capitals are meant to facilitate transition to the labor market. And this draws on Bourdieu's three forms of capital: economic, social, and cultural capital, but adds some forms of capital that are related to employability. And in a way, Tomlinson sees these forms of capital as something that can be built during one's university experience, and there's more of an emphasis on the strategic accumulation of these capitals. Okay, so the focus of existing research has been on strategies employed by young people and their families to get into prestigious schools and universities, but there is a gap in the literature on strategies used during university to gain positional advantage. So I looked at this through a mixed methods approach. The quantitative analysis of survey data explores patterns and relationships between the perceived value of a degree, success factors, and priorities. And the qualitative analysis is aiming to understand how and why students prioritize different goals during university. And I used the survey as a way of selecting students for interviews. I did some preliminary quantitative analysis to identify different profiles of students, and then I asked them to come for follow-up interviews. So the students who I interviewed are also, the responses are also recorded in the survey. So 180 students filled out the survey, and then I did 32 in-depth interviews with different profiles of students identified from the survey data. I focused on 4 departments: social policy, government, economics, and statistics. And these departments have been selected based on previous research looking into the career profiles of LSE undergraduates and the reason why they pick certain careers after graduation. So some prioritize values, some prioritize skills, and some prioritize different industries when making their decisions. So the questions in the survey captured their demographic and socioeconomic characteristics. I also asked the reasons for choosing the university and their subject, the perception of the role of higher education for social mobility, then how they evaluate their educational gains after spending 2 or 3 years at LSE. I'm not going to present that, but that's something important for us. Then I also asked them about priorities during university, expectations after graduation, and understandings of success. So more women than men answered the survey, though that is not surprising. In terms of nationality, 47% of the respondents are international students. And I also asked them about their perceived social class. So this is how they categorize themselves. So just 15% said they were working class, 8% said they were from a lower middle class background, 32% said they were middle class, 34% said they were upper middle class, and even 6% said they were upper class. In terms of ethnicity, 47% are Asian or Asian British, and 33% are. Okay, and I also talked a bit about the interview participants. So they were selected based on their responses regarding their main priority during university, the main factor identified as intrinsic success. And I tried to have a balanced, to have a balanced sample in terms of gender and the different departments. Okay, so I asked them about how important each of these factors is for their own success and also for the success of others. So when it comes to hard work, on average, they saw this as the most important for themselves and also for others. So they tend to think that most people at LSE are very hardworking, and that's they had success during. So this is educational success, academic success. Then, in terms of talent, this is seen to be important as well, though a bit more important for others than themselves. But interestingly, when looking at the structural factors such as parents' wealth and parent education, we see that they think on average that's much more important for others than themselves. So if you look at the difference there, 6.36 importance for others and 4.35 importance for self. So there is an acknowledgement that this matters for themselves as well, but not as much as for other people. Okay, when it comes to getting a good graduate job, hard work is again seen as the most important, and then all the other factors are seen as highly important, such as knowing the right people, talent, having specialist knowledge. But when asked to pick just one factor, most students either pick hard work or knowing the right people. Yet, in terms of priorities during university, most students still prioritize academic performance, though 30% prioritized career preparation. So this is a table showing 4 bivariate regression analyses looking at the relationship between the score that they gave when they said how important knowing the right people is, and each of these, the extent to which they prioritize each of these areas of development. So academic progress, career development, extracurricular activities, socializing, and a network. And with the data I have, there seems to be no statistically significant relationship between the extent to which they think knowing the right people is important and what they did and what they prioritized during university. Okay, so to sum up the quantitative analysis, academic success remains the dominant priority. Hard work is considered the most important factor for educational success, both for themselves and others. Parents' wealth and education is considered more important for other success than their own success. And then beliefs about factors leading to a good graduate job do not seem to be connected to students' priorities during university. And with my qualitative analysis, I'll try to explain why I think that's the case. Okay, so I asked them about the extent to which they think their degree will help them secure a professional job. And we see that 75% of the students either strongly agree or agree that their degree will help them secure a professional job. Yet, in the qualitative interviews, a different perspective showed up. So, in my discussion with Ayana, she reflected on the fact that the university degree is just like a prerequisite, and said that everything else employability-wise is what you do outside of university. And I asked, so how does that impact you, the fact that this is just a prerequisite? And she said that I feel scammed, is what she said. Before you go into university, you sort of think like, oh, I just need to get a degree and then like I'll be handed a job. But it's not like that. You get to this stage and it's like, it's not the end. There are still so many people at that university. What's the next signal? So she seems quite disappointed and disillusioned by the fact that it's not the end of the game, it's just another stage. And then Daniel said that compared to his father, who also went to quite an impressive university, he will have slightly worse opportunities because it's more competitive now, but also, as he said, I can use my family as a resource. I can build on all these other things. So I think the reason why they are quite optimistic in the survey that their degree will lead to a good professional job, yet they are disillusioned when talking one-to-one, is that they have realized that just by being at that university or just getting that degree, they won't automatically get a good job from that, or they won't automatically have an advantage. But it's about thinking that they can use at university to build these advantages. So Brian says that I looked at the graduate statistics, like the average wage for a politics graduate after 5 years was 50 grand, which is an insane amount of money by British standards. And also the prestige and the reputation LSE has, I thought it's going to set me up in a good way. And then, whilst I've been here, I still like view that as being helpful, but I've noticed slightly more about the environment you're in. Like the people around you are very honest about getting internships or doing extracurriculars, and that kind of encourages you to do it. And a similar perspective came from Iris, who's an economics student, and she said that I think the thing that has to differentiate people is the university they go to, their degree classification, the things that they did while they were at university. I do think as competitive as it has been, probably pushing people to do things while they're at university, in the long term is going to help in terms of getting a good job afterwards. And the same perspective comes from Lee and Aidan, who point out that they had to balance different priorities and that to make the most out of the experience is multifaceted. So it's all about balancing multiple goals. But there is some resistance towards studying instrumental games. So Matthew, who is in the economics department, that is assumed to favor a career in finance or consulting, pushed back against this narrative. So he said that when asked to describe his peers, he said, especially in my degree, they aren't only good at math and stats, they have some extracurricular, but they probably excel that in school. And then he said that he feels that he can't really prioritize that because of making sure my degree goes well and making sure that I have a head start. So the only students who were not conflicted about what to prioritize during university were the ones who focused solely on academic performance. However, these students had job secured offers for postgraduate education or knew that they could tap into their parents' networks to find graduate jobs. Most of them were still involved in extracurricular activities. So there's a quote here from Isabella who fits that profile, and she says, I think truth be told, even as much as I prioritize my individuality and my unique interests, I do still feel like I've been conditioned to believe that I have to constantly be working, constantly be building towards something in order to be successful. A lot of the students interviewed were very aware of the value of the connection that they could make with alumni and peers. And also because of the increased competition and because of perceiving peers as more privileged, as previously showed, young people were more willing to use connection. So Matthew shared with me that it's a bit of a funny story because in London I applied for about 200 different internships and got an interview but got rejected and so on. But then I was able to get an internship this year because I had a connection to my dad. And this somehow does not contradict the meritocratic story of hard work. It just allows for his hard work and the hard work of his peers to be recognized. So why do they do that? Why do they build in all these different spheres? So one perspective is that elite universities reproduce inherited privilege and legitimize this as well. So Edward, for example, was explaining to me that at the end of the day, employers aren't going to take you just because you're really wealthy and they know your dad. That does go on, but it won't be in actually competitive jobs. It has to be a meritocratic system. So I think it's like rich people realize that, like they're not stupid. They know that you can't just write off of inheriting forever. You need to actually become the smartest at the end of the day. And Zain and Avi are students who come from disadvantaged backgrounds. So Zain said that he already thinks he's privileged just because he's part of LSE. And then he even asked, I don't think you have a right to complain. At that point, do you work hard? And his answer is yes, absolutely. However, Avi did not have the possibility of dedicating all his time to his studies, to career development, to building these networks, and so on. So his experience is different. He says, I clock in, do what I have to do, and get out. I don't have the bandwidth to make the most out of other things. Yet he's very aware of the cost of not being able to do that. So, reflect on the material I've presented, priorities vary, but academic achievement is still most valued. The belief in importance of knowing the right people does not influence priorities during university. Hard work is commonly regarded as the most important factor for success for both self and others. Young people cultivate multiple forms of what Tomlinson calls graduate capitals, and there is resistance towards treating university experience in solely instrumental terms, yet not many of them cannot just focus on their studies and their academic development. And not everyone can maximize their time at university through building different forms of capital and being what one of the participants called a full-time student. Yeah, so I look forward to your thoughts and comments and questions, and happy to discuss.
Time there was a really rich tradition which all of us should reflect on because it's close to all of our experiences at university, and it makes us think quite hard about how we justify what we do in this institution, which also, like LSE, is a vehicle for privilege as well. So with that in mind, a couple of comments where others might have questions as well in the room, or please post your comments in the chat. My first thought is, I mean, Michael Sandel is coming to Oxford this term to talk about the tyranny of merit. Okay, and your participants seem like helpful meritocracy. Yeah? And the very concept was mocked by Michael Young in his book 1960s. So what's interesting about it is people can't see the problems with it. It seems so they're sort of saying, well, they're defending what they're doing. They're sort of saying, well, we're not inheriting wealth. We're working hard for it, and working hard either could be working hard at work or working hard at networks. Yeah, but working hard seems allowed, and so there's no more structural reflection on entitlement, the institutional entitlement. The reflections are on. So were you surprised by that? Because these are people. There were some of them in social science, weren't they?
Yeah. So, yeah, I think that's a really good point, how much they defend hard work. And yeah, I think they do have an awareness. So also in the conversation, there was an awareness of structural inequalities, but in a way that doesn't take away from the narrative that so they had advantages, yet they still worked hard. And I think I explain this in a way through the fact that their privilege is being threatened. So in the sense that perhaps their hard work, they're a bit anxious about whether their hard work will pay off or not. So I think they do tend to fall back on this meritocratic narrative when their own position is threatened. But that being said, there was a participant who was trying to convey to me that he is privileged. So he would explain exactly how he got internships through his dad knowing these politicians. And I think because I'm not, so I wasn't born here, I'm not a native, I think he was really explaining to me how the system works. And in a way that was more of a post-meritocratic, post-meritocratic perspective of we know in a way that meritocracy is a myth.
Yes. Okay.
So then, with that understanding between us, then I can communicate to you all the ways in which I'm privileged, and I won't be there. And I'm even socially aware, or something along those lines. So I did observe both discourses of the meritocratic discourse, but also the acknowledgement of inherited advantages without necessarily seeing that as an issue. Yeah.
That's sort of acknowledgement light, isn't it?
Exactly.
It's sort of not really owning the privilege or the structural inequalities that create that privilege.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Yeah. Other questions in the room, or well, okay, but perhaps I'll ask Miley to ask the first question because you've jumped into the chat. Miley, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, sure. So I was just wondering if you challenged any of these narratives in the interviews themselves, and how that kind of discussion happened with you being kind of aware of these things that I don't know if all of your participants would have been or in the same way. So yeah, I'm really interested in kind of those interactions where perhaps your ideas may have differed from the participants. Really interesting talk. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't challenge them much during the interview. I try to get their perspective, so I don't feel like contradicting them would be a good strategy. But what I did was to get those questions from the survey and ask again during the interview. So questions about what was the most important factor for success. And I asked that again in the interview. Most people answered the same. Some of them did change their answer though. And then I asked them to comment on the links between those factors. And they were aware. So for example, they said, yes, I worked hard, but that's also because my parents, who understood the value of education, instilled in me a desire to study hard and so on. So I did see then a more nuanced picture that's perhaps not reflected in the surveys, but yeah, there was an acknowledgement of how those different factors interact.
It's a good question. I mean, so the hard work is a sort of supplement to meritocracy. I'm bright. I also work hard, so therefore that reinforces my chances somehow. To what extent do you think they were telling you the story that they felt they ought to be telling you?
So I think that's a good point for me to consider, especially because I teach in the university. So of course there was some social desirability intention, and probably, but I think somehow I'm not sure they knew which story I wanted to hear so because in a way I think that the two perspectives I have contradict each other. So I'm someone who works at the university and who also has had academic success, but I'm also someone who has reflected on this in my previous work. So I'm not sure, which story they were prompted to tell. So I hope that in the end they told their own.
Because you didn't come in saying this is all terribly illegal.
Yeah, no.
We've got lots of questions behind. So Abigail first, and then Karina, and then Carol.
Hi, thank you so much. This was super interesting. I'm also an LSE alum, actually, did my undergrad there. And so I have kind of two-part question. One of the things I was wondering as you were speaking, it was like the extent to which you think the university shapes, perhaps inadvertently, the attitudes of the students. Like I remember finding LSE very career-centric, and that made me really concerned about like networking and trying to build those connections to like help my career. And so I'm wondering if you think the university has anything to do with that. But the question I put in the chat was whether you thought that the students' priorities evolve as they go through the institution. So maybe they start off really like bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and are concerned about like their academics and really kind of value that. But then perhaps as they get towards the end of their degree, whether that changes and then they think more about their career and that becomes the priority. Yeah, those are my two questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I'll start with the last question, whether it changes. I only interviewed students towards the end of their studies, so either the end of their second year or their third year. So I wanted to talk to them at the time where I thought they would already be thinking about what they want to do next. So in that sense, I cannot observe what happened just as they set foot in the school, though from their recollections, they did say that it was my first week and I was talking to a few of my peers, and then they were already thinking about spring weeks, so applying for internships, and apparently this discussion happened as they were all in line to register for their studies. So I think, and this links to your first question, it does start very early on. So they are quite intentional about the way they spend their time, and they have these discussions quite early on. I don't know how that compares to other institutions such as Oxford, but yes, it's and I think from some of the quotes I included from the participants, they did say that it's a lot about the environment. It's not even about teachers or careers events, though we do have a lot of careers events, but I think it's about what they talk about when they're together and how they push each other to apply for internships and so on.
This great, thank you. Thanks, Abigail. Karina?
Hi, yeah, just really interesting presentation. Really enjoyed that. Thank you. I wondered if you encountered any differences between different groups of participants, because especially, you've mentioned all those different types of capital, and I imagine, people from different social backgrounds might be able to engage differently with those types of capital and tap into them differently. And especially, I wondered if you found any differences between domestic and international students. And I'm asking that because I imagine many international students may have limited capacity to network, successfully with local Brits. And I imagine even if they wish to do so, they might struggle to network successfully because of, limited fluency or limited existing contacts, cultural references, and so on. So I just wondered if anything like that came up in your interviews. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So in terms of social class, I did look at the association between social class and priorities while at university, and I did not find statistically significant results.
Mm-hmm.
And also in terms of gender, so I tested for that as well. But I think I need to look further into the association between social class and the factor they think is most important for their success. This I should look into. So thank you for.
I feel like there's lots of potential there. I feel like with all your data, just to see, play around a little bit and see what you find.
Thank you. And then I did not. I think this is a good point in terms of the difference between domestic and international students, especially, again, their understandings of success might differ a bit. Yeah, I'll definitely look into that. However, they do have, so some international students do have networks also at university, because I think it is common for at least some groups of students to pick UK as a destination country for their studies, so they would have their own networks. But yeah, it would be interesting to know whether, in terms of inherited networks, that might be the case.
And whether you're playing off different networks and keeping both of them going just in case, I'm imagining you're keeping your option.
Yes, absolutely. And the quote I included from the student did say that he eventually found an internship back in his home country.
Because of daddy.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah, it might be that in a way they have different options available. So they try. I did interview the ones who said that they would want to stay in the UK just for comparability reasons. But yeah, most of them do want to stay in the UK. However, international students would have a second option to fall back on, perhaps.
And Hiral, you also had a good question as well. Would you like to pose a question?
Hello, hi Fiona, hi David.
Hi.
I was curious about this disconnect between what they knew that social relationships were important, networking was important, but then their priorities were not aligned. And I was wondering, what role did curriculum design play in helping to align that, particularly if something came through in your interviews that showed, oh, we had this career fair or we had something which really helped us. So I think I was curious about the role of curriculum design in that. And then I'm personally interested in the role of spaces in enabling social relationships. And I was wondering, because LSE has got fabulous campus, it's in London, and I was wondering whether your participants mentioned anything about being in particular type of buildings or spaces, or being in London really helped with either how they frame value of their degree or their priorities. Thank you.
That's a great question, Hiral, because LSE famously is just the jump to Whitehall, isn't it? So it's very close to the action. Yeah.
So what role does curriculum design play? So I mean, this has not come up in my study, but it might be that teachers still value academic rigor more and push a bit that agenda rather than university is important as a space for socializing. I don't know. This I have to reflect a bit more on to understand why that's not shown in the priorities. It might also be that so there is some data I didn't show that the reason why for choosing their subject and their degree and their university is most often interest in the subject. So most of them have a real interest in studying their subjects, and some of them even said that they would want their peers to be even more engaged in the academic side of things. But the role of spaces and being in London, so they did see that as really important for their employment opportunities and for the careers event, being able to talk to professionals who work in different companies, but also in the civil service and so on. However, some of them also reflected on the fact that they cannot afford to live in central London, so they have to commute. And these were some of the students who said that they felt they were at a disadvantage because they couldn't make the most out of the experience that others had.
Great, Shan.
Thank you. That's really interesting research. I had a question about we were talking about how they manage to develop privilege, and I feel like in your study and also some kind of similar other research I've read, it seems a lot of clarity and structure in the way that privilege or elitism or meritocracy have been imagined, and it's also a very clear pathway to to develop or manage privilege in higher education space. I wonder if in your research, if there's any students who articulate anything that's kind of, maybe this is not the right word, anti-privilege. We don't have a lot of language around in that space. My research focused on kind of the non-elite space, and I find that I lack the language tools to describe what it looks like. And also these students, they don't have that language to talk about their aspirations and their experiences. So if there's anything that's kind of anti-privilege, and also if there is, if they're already kind of privileged status, how does that come into play in, you know, supporting them to anti-privilege, let's say?
I think that's a really good question. I have to think about that. I'll give you a provisional answer, but I'll reflect on it further. Yes, there was some anti-privilege talk, mostly so the students who felt they were disadvantaged were saying that they either have to commute or there was this realization that LSE is a space of privilege and that they think of themselves as average. So in one of the participants said, I have the average, my parents have average income, we have the average sort of experience, but here I feel disadvantaged because everyone else seems to have a lot more. So yeah, that was I think it was an acknowledgement of the fact that there's a lot of privileged individuals in the university, but at the same time, I felt that that played into the way they understand their success versus other success, because I think you'll always find someone who's more privileged than you are, and you'll compare yourself to that person, and then that can sustain your meritocratic narrative. Whereas in fact, yeah, there are other forms of advantage that might not be so visible that still exist.
Reminds me of the in English 60s comedians for the Monty Python, right, where they had this sketch where I'm more important than you. Any more questions? One here and then that's it.
Hi, I'm a visiting student from the States, and then it's a very interesting topic, fantastic research, like questions, by the way. I was wondering, what is the stance of, let's say, British institutions on like institutions being a reflector of privileges or producer of privileges, right? I think, and then that's first the discussion I want to throw out. Second, it's just, I'm not really familiar with the mainstream or dominant curriculum when it comes to privileges here in the UK, because I feel like maybe I'm just in a bubble. Back home, it's like I feel like there's, even though we can say it's performative, but like land acknowledgement, privilege acknowledgement is almost very mainstream in the US. Almost if you were to do this, like replicate this conversation interviews in the US, almost everyone would say, oh, I first want to acknowledge my privileges, right? Like either it's like it just being an institution is a privilege, my parents, yada, yada, yada. And then they will go into hard work. And it just kind of shocking to me to see like students at LSE immediately jump into hard work. And then, you know, I was just like kind of say, wow, like, is this just how it is here? how are students taught this? I'm done.
Chris, for me, it's not just no. I mean, I think you're right. I think it's absolutely right that this sort of, particularly because of the history of land acknowledgements, that there is a sort of at least a sort of sense to be important to acknowledge privilege seriously, and displacement and the history of the land around it. I mean, because the empire that Britain created was somewhere else, we're sort of in denial still about that. And so I mean, I don't know what you think, but you know, from your discussion, it seems that people are defending meritocracy rather than acknowledging privilege. Is that fair?
Yeah, or they're changing their definition of meritocracy to acknowledge for privilege while still maintaining the core of hard work and talent. So I think this is something that I need to reflect on and bring forward in my discussion, that it doesn't seem for me that they think that so the fact that they do acknowledge that parents' education plays a role, even if a small one, but that's acknowledged. That doesn't take away from their hard work, their talent. And so it used to be that the meritocratic narrative was just through my hard work and talent, and now it's like with I don't know, a good dose of hard work and talent and everything else. So I think, and this is I think especially coming from the recognition that meritocracy, the traditional idea of meritocracy, is a myth. But so we have these advantages, but then we think, okay, most people here do. So in a way, it's a level playing field, and then hard work matters, talent matters again. I don't know. I'm trying also to make sense of this and how they coexist as explanations for success.
But because there's no modeling of
Yeah.
an explicit knowledge of institutional privilege, there's no acknowledgement of it by the teachers or by the institution, that the students aren't learning to understand that this is institutionally produced. That's the point. That's your point.
Yeah, it's just, I feel like right now, especially in the course I'm learning, is just thinking about like, especially in the US institution and system, especially everything traced back to racism, right? And it's just like how it's almost so hard to separate the individuals versus institution systematic like advantages and all that. It's just like, wow. And I was also thinking, it's like, maybe just, yeah, I can't wait to go to more like UK webinar, just like getting.
No, it's a good question. We should start thinking about that. Or starting everywhere when I was doing a lot of Oxford's privilege. Happy to do that. We ought to wrap up, but Gonzalo, one last question.
Yeah, thank you, Fiona, for your presentation. Like great findings. I'm very interested in this anxiety that especially the privileged students have regarding their job prospect, and it seems to be like an exacerbated sense of risk. In our interviews with Paulina here, with the Oxford student, we are also seeing people that say studying in the most privileged university and the most privileged degree, saying probably now the apprenticeship are the place to be because they have more prospect of jobs. So I was wondering if this, among this group of the most privileged ones, like if this is more like rather than more risk, it's more like a reflection of the self-entrepreneurial subject as the only way to be, and they are an acceptable moral subject position to portray, and so that it's becoming impossible to present ourselves as something non-meritocratic. And in that way, that probably could explain how they can also recognize some structural and parentocracy playing there, but also trying to say, no, but this is hard work and it's my trajectory. What do you think about that?
I think that's a really good point, but listening to your question, it's almost like they're a bit anxious and a bit upset that the institution isn't as privileged as it is, or in a way, it's not automatic that it converts into advantages. It's almost like that's something that they're disappointed with at first. Yeah, I think there's also this pressure that they know the statistics, they know that it works for most people, they know that most of their peers will get good graduate jobs, and so if they can't, then they're failing. They're not doing something right. They can't convert this opportunity into a real advantage, and so I think that would be something perhaps embarrassing. Yeah, so I think there's a lot of pressure there. Well, I have all the conditions to be successful. What if I won't be? Yeah.
Good. We approach wrap up. It's on 3 o'clock, but thank you very much. Really, really.